All right, power and influence in the workplace. Apologies for the delay in getting this up. I have been absolutely overwhelmed with emails. Some of them are related to the assignment, and some of the more tragic ones related to the Nepalese earthquake. I've had to give a lot of extensions in relation to that, so I do apologise for the delay in getting this up. But we'll get straight into it. Talk about power. Now, power, quite simply, is the capacity of one person or one party to influence another person, another party, another group. And power depends on this question of dependency. So that the degree to which you can influence someone else is the degree to which they're dependent on something that you've got. And if you have no dependency on that person, they have no power over you. I often use this example in relation to bullying, for example, which is a misuse or an abuse of power. My recommendation, it's not that I'm absolving the bully at all, but my recommendation to people who are being bullied is to do every effort to show that it makes no impact upon you. Because if you show that you're not frightened of the person bullying you as best you can, then they lose that capacity to actually make an impact on you. Now that's not quite based on dependency, but let's take it into a job situation where a manager is attempting to coerce you into doing something that you don't want to do, and they're threatening you with losing your job. But if you show that you're not afraid of losing your job, that you're not dependent on that job for your livelihood, even though naturally you are, they will lose that power over you. You just tell them, "Oh, go right ahead, make my day." That kind of Clint Eastwood personality. Now, power, as you can imagine from the example that I just gave, also it normally operates from this higher level of power to this lower level of power, but countervailing power is the power of underlings, or the power of people below you, or those who are dependent on you, to manipulate a situation in the opposite direction. And you'll have, even in the case of bullying, for example, examples of junior staff bullying successfully, if you can use that term, bullying senior staff, not unknown. Now, power, of course, and we'll talk further about this, depends on the power of your networks, and you can get power through association, as in Hillary Clinton, for example. Her association, I think this comes from Forbes magazine, and it shows all the powerful people, including the German Chancellor and the head of the Federal Reserve at that time, the Federal Reserve Bank, and even the South Korean President and the British Prime Minister at the time. We've got an election about to happen. So you can see that she has power as a result of being a senator and a private citizen and married to a former president, as we well know, but she also has power through association, through a network. So this is one of the sources of power. But in terms of how we divide power up, we'll go through the list quickly. You can have legitimate power, which is the power that is derived from law or policy or convention. So if you rely on this, you don't have to have big muscles, for example. You can simply rely on the fact that, well, you are the managing director. You may be a boring, nerdy person, but you're the managing director. And this power derives from an agreement that we all have, that people in certain roles have that power over others. It's based often on just this general consensus, and of course something more precise in job descriptions, which are allocated roles. Now, legitimate power does vary a great deal across national organisational cultures. Some societies are much more hung up on legitimate power, and some societies are much less so. Now, reward power relates to that issue of dependency we talked about before, in that it relates to, if someone has the ability to reward you, they have a power over you because you become dependent on that reward, naturally enough. So reward power relates to the ability to control rewards that are valued by others, or to remove rewards that obviously are a negative thing for others if they're removed. So reward power can operate upward again, in that countervailing power that we talked about before, as well as downwards. Coercive power is that muscular stuff, the ability to apply punishment, the ability to forcibly get things happening. And again, people can bully upward as well as downwards. So that would be an example of coercive power being used upward. Peer pressure is a form of coercive power. Anywhere where you're yelling and thumping your fist on the desk, that's coercive power. Expert power is a more respectable form of power, one that we can all appreciate, and one that you're gaining in as a result of doing this master's degree or postgraduate degree at CQU. So it's the ability to acquire knowledge and possess knowledge or skills that other people need or value. And this form of power is particularly dominant now in the knowledge economy. So the power of information is a form of expertise power and is often based on legitimate or formal power. But what we mean by informational power, those who have information, particularly rare and valued information, have power simply in the possession of that information. Referent power is some of the power that a lot of people talking about leadership like to talk about. It's the power that comes from being liked. So it's the power that's associated with charisma, for example. Now, in relation to the information power, the other thing is, remember we talked about networks, Hillary Clinton's network there. Notice that the person at the center of these kind of wheels of power, they have a high degree of power control over the flow of information. So that could be, for example, a boss who has direct control over a number of different people, and there's little contact between those individual employees within the organization. The all-channel system, of course, everybody has equal access to the information. Everyone has access to everybody else within that network. These are linear or chain networks. You're dependent on the one person above you in terms of what power of informational power you get. Now, power is, like all things, subject to certain contingencies, and we talked about one of those contingencies a few moments ago when we talked about the issue of dependency. Now, some of the things that reduce power that one has, so simply imagine if one has a reward that people want. Now, if that reward can easily be substituted by someone else with another reward, then it has a high degree of substitutability. So similarly, if you've got a skill, but that skill is a easily substitutable skill. Everybody knows how to fix the photocopier, which is an example I often use. If only one person knows how to use the photocopier or fix the photocopier, then that becomes a highly non-fungible skill, and subsequently you gain more power out of having that skill. You can increase this issue of substitutability by restricting the resource through registration as a nurse, for example, or licensing to manufacture something. Now, centrality, we talked about that issue in relation to the networks, the degree and nature of interdependence between the power holder and others, how central you are to networks, how central you are to other individuals within the network. It's a function of how many others are affected by you and how quickly others are affected by you. That relates to centrality. Discretion. Are you completely hemmed in by legislation, policy, law? If so, you have very little power, even though you may exercise it, because the power is actually invested in the documents that back up your position. Those rules and regulations, they tend to limit power and limit discretion. And it's also a matter of perception. So if you simply swan around looking as if you've got the power and the discretion to carry that power out, you gain in power as a result. Visibility is fairly obvious. If you are sitting in a back room with all the power but you do not have the ability to be seen and carry out that power, then that's an issue. This issue of wearing white coats or wearing the suit when everybody else is wearing blue collar kind of clothing or uniforms, that can increase your visibility. And symbols, of course, generally communicate the fact that you've got this highly visible power. All right, we'll talk about influence now. Influence is any kind of behaviour that attempts to alter someone else's attitudes or behaviours using one or more of the power bases that we've talked about. And once again, it can go up or down or across in a hierarchy. You can influence upwards, you can influence downwards, you can influence your colleagues around you. Now, there are a number of different ways you can influence people through silent authority. That often comes from having high degrees of legitimate power or role modelling good behaviour. It's common in high power distant cultures where, as the boss doesn't even have to tell or yell about something for it to have an influence. We simply have so much awe for the legitimate power above us. It has so much more power than us that we simply follow it just by nature of the power that we observe. Assertiveness, you can use vocal authority, where you can either use legitimate or coercive power, yelling, and it comes into that coercive category, to remind, confront, check, and threaten people. Access to information, informational power. Coalition formation is a good one. We talked about Hillary Clinton there, but you can actively, like through LinkedIn, for example, gain more power by forming networks with other people who may or may not be more powerful than you. And by the way, any students who wish to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'll certainly accept your requests, simply because I'm encouraging people at your level to consider building your networks for your future job prospects, and LinkedIn is an ideal way to do that. Now, moving on, types of influence can also include persuasion, where you use facts or logical arguments or emotional appeals, and it's often related here to referent power, which we talked about before, the charismatic sort. There are there's some beautiful research in this area, and this is an area where I'm actually quite expert at, both because of my PhD, but also because of a general interest that I've got in this area. But, excuse me, if you know in advance, for example, that someone else, let's say you're selling someone a Toyota, and you know they're going to go down the road and talk to the Ford people or the Holden people. One way to inoculate people against the persuasive power of the Holden or Ford salespeople is to actually tell them, to plant in their mind, oh look, the Ford guy is going to tell you that blah 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 blah, but the reality is blah 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 blah. So when they actually go down the road and see the Ford, they'll be inoculated. This is the inoculating effect. You plant a little seed of the opposition's argument in them, and they'll be protected against that, particularly if you've given them weaponry to fight that argument. Ingratiation is basically being charming and through flattery or through humour, doing people a favour, but just generally being somewhat saccharine nice. Impression management involves shaping your public image so that you look like a trustworthy, capable person. And this issue of exchange, it's commonly used in supermarkets, for example, where people hand you little gifts, so-called, that are probably worth a few cents, of makeup or a soap product, or even when they hand you a pamphlet with some advice, there's a sense that it creates a sense of exchange or reciprocity where you feel you need to do something back. Okay. Okay. Just generally, this is a little bit of an overview here. In terms of the consequences of power, you are looking to get commitment from your people that you're attempting to influence. And commitment is also the terms like involvement and engagement are often used in the literature. Quite similar. Compliance is a lower level of getting them to do what you want. Compliance refers to simply, superficially, they'll do what you want. But on deeper down, they haven't emotionally or through attitudinally or cognitively come on board with your message. And resistance is what you're really not looking for, is where they haven't emotionally come on board, they haven't physically come on board, they're just not on board. Now, to reach levels of commitment, you tend to find it best to use persuasion, impression management or ingratiation or exchange, and these are called collectively soft power tactics, and they tend to build longer term commitment. Now, these harder power tactics or hard power tactics include using authority, silent authority, upward appeal, which is actually also potentially a soft power tactic, and coalition formation, which also can potentially be a soft power tactic. But certainly information control and assertiveness are harder power tactics. And these soft power tactics tend to lead to longer term commitment, whereas these hard power tactics tend to create distrust. I've got that a little bit wrong. It tend to be a little bit more temporary and act, if you like, a bit more like extrinsic rewards in terms of how they work. They work when they're there. So having authority works. But there's that saying in English, when the cat's away, the mice do play. That's a very good example that the fear of the cat towards the mice is only present when the cat is present. And when the cat's not present, it doesn't work. Alrighty. Some of the other contingencies we can consider is, does the leader have this degree of legitimacy or expert power? Does he have the cognitive arguments, the rational arguments on his side or her side? And also this issue of status, whether the status is higher or lower than the person you're trying to influence. And cultural issues, for example, US managers tend to use a lot more ingratiation, and as we said before, high power distance cultures such as Asian cultures will tend to use silent authority more frequently. Then there's this issue of social networks. The more you network, the more you receive expert information, it increases your power. I'll merely talk about this to emphasize the importance of you building your social capital, and I talked briefly there about LinkedIn. You know, the way the network's strengths tend to work, we tend to define network strengths in terms of three characteristics. Centrality, which we talked about before, the degree to which you are central to a group of people. The degree of closeness, how close, how short and efficient the paths are between you and the next person. And this degree to which you are a connector of people, whether you are, that's something we call betweenness, the degree to which you connect a network and another network, for example. So access and timing in relation to information are two other contingencies I should have mentioned before. And the example that I'd like to give here is a quite easy one to understand: insider trading. Insider trading is illegal, as you know, on the stock market, and it simply involves you knowing information earlier than someone else, and you having access to information that other people do not have. If you have those two things, it can be illegal within a stock market context, but also, putting aside the issue of legality, it gives you an enormous power. And now building these networks, of course, outside the legal issues of stock market trading, building these networks gives you this earlier access, or easier access and earlier timing than other people will get. So social networks offer a number of things. They offer, of course, likability. You know, that's referent power. People know you, people trust you if they know you. They increase your visibility. We tend to recommend those we remember or know. They increase your access, as I said before, to information. Now, the textbook refers briefly to Mark Granovetter's theory of strong ties versus weak ties. We tend to build our ties most frequently to a strong degree with people that we meet often, people swimming in the same pools as us. These strong ties tend to be characterized by close relationships, people we frequently interact with, we're interdependent with, and we have many different levels of relationships with. We do sport together, we have coffee together, we go on holidays together, for example, and it's also characterized by resource sharing. Whereas weak ties are often these mere acquaintances. But the key, to come back to a point I was making before about LinkedIn, is that these diverse networks of weak ties, I mean, I've never met you, we can connect on LinkedIn. that's a weak tie. But if you have a lot of these weak ties, they do help us swim in new swimming pools, and this is the key point. They help us connect with people who aren't the part of the safe, cosy group that we're already part of. It's essential in getting jobs, for example. You can be linked with different pools of knowledge, different kinds of people with different kinds of power and new networks. Now, finally, we'll just have a brief word about politics. Now, politics are the behaviours that people perceive as being self-serving, designed for personal gain, rather than for the good of the organisation or for the team. So we're not talking about organisational citizenship behaviours in any sense. Now, politics tends to thrive within an organisation when there's a shortage of resources. So people are scrabbling around trying to get the few remaining resources within a company, or when there's active change happening within a company, or finally, when bosses allow a situation to become ambiguous at work. Things like politics thrives, and politics is one of the, gossip thrives, and gossip is one of those characteristics of politics, of course. Bad gossip. That's it. One of the quickest lectures, but hopefully I got across the main points there.